we're trying to figure out what impact Latino-owned businesses have in the state of Texas. And we just ran into what you just said, that there's a huge gap and lack of information on Hispanic-owned businesses, because you can't figure out what kind of economic impact they have or economic power they have unless you have the data about how many businesses there are. So that's one thing that's very vital to have. I don't know why we don't gather that kind of information, but we need to do a better job of getting it. On the state level, we've actually partnered with the University of Texas at Austin to do a statewide survey of Hispanic businesses, not only to try to gather the exact number of Hispanic-owned businesses in the state, but also to calculate what kinds of businesses they are, what industries they're in, do they sell products, do they sell services, and that you also have a benchmark so that as years go by, you can begin to monitor using metrics the changes that are occurring. We're about to go through a huge shift, both demographic shift and economic shift, as the baby boomers retire and die off, where that money, that power, then transfers. We're going to see a big transfer of wealth when people, when these boomers, die off or they retire and they leave their money to their kids and that sort of thing. So we're about to see this huge transformation. And as you look at where we are from an education perspective, because what we're seeing across the country, especially here in Texas, is the largest growing demographic group, young Latinos, is also the fastest to be dropping out of high school. And you can't have successful economic development if you don't have an educated workforce, and you can't have an educated workforce when you have a 40 to 50% dropout rate. I think one of the best speakers that I've heard on this topic is Dr. Steve Murdoch, the former head of the U.S. Census, the former state demographer for Texas, and currently a professor of sociology at Rice University. Dr. Murdoch has basically said, if you want to know what the United States looks like 20, 30 years from now, look at Texas today. And his quote recently was, "It's basically over for Anglos," and that got a lot of attention. And what he meant was that Anglos are not having enough children to replace themselves as a population. And so you have this older Anglo population that, as he says, is just falling off the demographic life chart. And this younger Hispanic audience that is growing at a very rapid pace. Yeah. And that these two demographic groups are not pitted against one another, but they're intertwined with one another, and they are completely dependent upon one another. That the older Anglo demographic group needs the younger Latinos in the workforce to be able to supply the Social Security funding system to be able to pay for their retirement. And the younger Latinos need the older Anglos to be able to pay taxes into a system to keep ensuring that these Latinos stay in school and they get educated and they go into college and they help build the future workforce for the country. And it's a very powerful and moving statement that he makes, and it is very, very accurate. Sometimes when you have two demographic groups like that, there's a little bit of culture shock, especially in states like North Carolina, South Carolina, where the growth in the Latino population may have grown at a rate of 400% to 500% over a decade. And so they find themselves lacking the infrastructure they don't have bilingual healthcare professionals or police officers or teachers. And so when you have something happen that quickly, there's a lot of resistance and culture shock, and so that leads to some sociological issues in those states. But in Texas, in the Southwest, it's completely different. But those two demographic groups do need each other, and I think if more people saw the data and understood the relationship between the two, we'd be getting a lot further down the road. Yeah. So you have a choice. you can, you know, be in denial about the birth rate and the urbanization efforts, or you can adapt your plan to what's happening now in society and mold it and shape it and have a better assurance of the outcome. And it's a simple choice, and many communities, unfortunately, don't know how to embrace it, but a lot of communities are. For a couple years there, you kind of feel like you're knocking your head against a brick wall, because we've been talking about the business and economic argument for immigration. And from a large standpoint, a lot of people, they're too focused on the politics of the immigration issue. But over time, you begin to see more and more people start understanding what you're talking about. And because it's all based and rooted in data and not emotion, it's pretty easy to understand, and it's irrefutable because it's data, it's fact. It's not opinion. You just put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and then you can see what's directly in front of you, as now we are seeing with the census numbers. That's rooted in data. So there's that we have begun to see more and more acceptance of the business and economic argument for immigration reform. I'm also very happy to see what the business community achieved in Arizona by defeating some of the unconstitutional bills, some of the anti-business, anti-immigrant bills that came before the Arizona legislature. And so when you get that many people together and they send a strong message and people hear that message, it has weight, it has merit, and people will stand up and listen. So I do feel better about where we're headed, and that this business and economic argument for immigration reform is catching on.